Welcome again, whether you're watching us here live or online. It's great to have you joining us for our last week of the series, 30 Days to Live, where we're asking the uncomfortable question, if you only had a limited time left to live, would you live differently? How would you live differently? And I often find that God puts these little things in our way when certainly when I'm doing a series, if we're talking about suffering, there's some extra suffering to be had. And I've joked with friends that I should do a sermon series one day on how to cope when life is fine and everything's good and there's no problems. And, you know, maybe God would bring some of those circumstances into our lives sometimes. Because we can ask the question, and I saw even as I was finishing the sermon, there was a news report on the news.com.au website about media personality Chrissy Swan. And she revealed that she's had a massive change in her life as she realised at 45, she called it, she was halfway to dying. So it wasn't 30 days to live, but it was like 45 years left to live. And she said, am I happy with the way I'm going, the way it is? Am I happy with who I am? Am I happy with who I am to other people? Am I happy with who I am to me? What do I want to change? And so she overhauled her life. She started walking every day. She gave up drinking. And she said everything changed. So good on her for at least acknowledging that and wanting to improve her health. And so we've looked at this idea of wanting to change and the different ways that we would do that we live passionately, that we love completely, that we learn humbly, that we live purposefully. And today I want to look at the idea of leaving a legacy, that if we were confronted by that news, we would want to leave behind something positive for the next generation. But I know this whole idea of change is not automatic. Someone came to me after the service last week and said, you know, I've worked with people who are dying and many of them don't change. And I think that's absolutely right. We have assumed that once you're face to face with some of these issues that you would change, that you would want to be different. But some people hold on to their habits. They continue with their grudges. They keep on making the same mistakes over and over again without changing, without mellowing, without repenting. But I hope we would be different. I hope if we were confronted by that, even if there is 45 years left to live and we're halfway to dying, we would be different. In a sense, leaving a legacy is what everyone does. A legacy is simply what we leave behind because we can't take anything with us. We can't take our possessions. We can't take our memories. We all leave some sort of legacy behind. But whether it's a positive one or a negative one is up to us and the way we live our lives. And I want to tell two stories to start with of two very different type of legacies. One is an obituary. We tend to, I think funeral notices are less and less. We might talk to people in the funeral industry about how that happens, but in America they're more used to writing obituaries that have the funeral details but tell a bit of a story of the person who passed away. This particular obituary was so brutal, was so harsh. Initially, the newspaper editor who received it had to check the truth of it before he printed it because he didn't think anything could be so cruel. But he eventually said that it was true, that all the family members felt the same way and decided to print it. It started with the standard stuff of when they were born and died and all the relatives and everything like that, and the lady who wrote it apologised if she'd left anything out. And then the obituary about Dolores said this: Dolores had no hobbies, made no contribution to society, rarely shared a kind word or deed in her life. I speak for the majority of her family when I say her presence will not be missed by many. Very few tears will be shed and there'll be no lamenting over her passing. We may have some fond memories of her and perhaps we'll think of those times too. And I finished by saying this: I truly believe at the end of the day that all of us will only miss what we never had: a good and kind mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. I hope she's finally at peace with herself, and for the rest of us left behind, I hope that this is the beginning of a time of healing and learning to be a family again. And that was the family of Dolores Aguilar. And that's pretty cruel, isn't it? But obviously that's how that family felt. That's how she lived her life, and that's what she left behind. That was her legacy. The other story is one that's personal to me. My early days in ministry I spent in Murwillumbah. A whole bunch of us around the same age, in our mid-20s, starting our first ministry, still doing youth ministry, and still kept in contact with a lot of the guys, even though I'd moved from Sydney to Murwillumbah, and kept in contact with guys all around Australia. A guy in Sydney said, look, I've got 3 of young people from our youth group coming up your way. Would you make sure you look after them? They're going to visit the church and visit some family and friends up there. I said, no worries. They came to church on a Sunday night, 2 girls and a guy. And one girl and one guy were obviously friendly, and the third girl, I think, felt like a bit of a third wheel. They asked to see me and made an appointment in my office, and one girl talked about her real desire to make a difference. She was a young Christian. Her family weren't Christians. A lot of her school friends weren't Christians. And she really had a desire to make a difference for Jesus, to make sure people knew that she was a Christian. And she was bright, she was vibrant, she was attractive, it was just everything going for her. She talked about what she was doing, and I said, look, you seem to be doing all the right things. People, sometimes they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you're obviously kind and caring to your friends and your family. You're wanting to make a difference. You're living a good life. So you just need to keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure you'll make an impact. Because she felt like a bit of a third wheel, the other 2 went off and did their own thing, and she went off with the family to a farm in northern New South Wales. She did a bit of horse riding, and unfortunately she fell off and hit her head. She was rushed through to Brisbane, and I remember jumping in the car and visiting her up in hospital. She looked almost exactly the same as when I saw her. There was no other injuries apart from the bandage around her head. Unfortunately, she'd hit herself in the temple. She had no brain activity. Her family were called, and they had to turn off the life support. It was just so tragic. They flew her body back to Sydney, and they did the funeral down there with my friend who had told me that they were coming. And slowly by slowly, over months and years, the legacy that she left behind kept multiplying. He said the youth group grew. Her mother became a Christian, got involved in the church, got involved in ministry over the years. And it was just an amazing thing to see that she was making more of a difference than she thought. She was leaving a greater legacy behind than she realised. And I tell those 2 stories in comparison to say I don't know if those people knew what a legacy was or what legacy they thought they were leaving behind. But we will leave something behind. We will leave the memories of how we've lived a life, and we will leave all that when we go. It just depends on how we live, of what sort of legacy we will be. It's not even a case of trying deliberately to leave a legacy. One of my favourite Christian singers, Rich Mullins, said, if my life is motivated by an ambition to leave a legacy, what I could probably leave is a legacy of ambition. But if my life is motivated by the power of God's Spirit in me, the awareness of the indwelling Christ, if I allow his presence to guide my motives, that's the only time I think we really leave a great legacy. Leaving a legacy isn't wanting our name to be remembered. It's not wanting our name on a hospital wing or a school building or something like that. It's just really wanting to make a difference for Jesus. to make a difference in someone's life, that we will be remembered positively, and our example is one that they want to follow. As I said, if we're confronted by this, or knowing that Jesus would come back soon, and we decided that we wanted change, what would we do? I want to look at a Bible passage where Paul talks about this. It's often talked about at funerals as he approaches his death, but it's about his attitude as he faces this time himself, as he looks back on the things that he's done and what he wants other people to know. It's probably his last letter. He's probably, if you're around for when we had finished our holidays, it's probably the one that he wrote in that jail in Rome as he's waiting for his execution. He dodged a lot of bullets, I guess we could say, in his lifetime. He'd seen a lot of people try to have it in for him. But as the persecution of the emperor, the Caesars, would really ramp up, this is probably facing his last one. In days or weeks or moments after he's finished writing this, he's gone. And he says this, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering. The time has come for my departure. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but to all who have longed for his appearing." The reading often stops there, but I want to continue because it says, "Do your best to come to me. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. So please get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry." So I want to look at some of the phrases that Paul talks about as he's approaching his own death. He says he's poured out like a drink offering. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the story of David, who just remarked as they were talking about their favourite drinks that he loved to drink from the well back in Bethlehem. And the three mighty men of David, they snuck back into Bethlehem and got him that drink. But instead of drinking it, he poured it out as an offering to God. And that's the sense that Paul is saying that his life has been. It's been a drink offering. He's held nothing back. He didn't say, "Well, thanks, and I'll give a bit to God." He just poured out his life. And he poured it out for God. He's left nothing back. In sporting terms, we would say, if someone's given their all on the sporting field, we say they left it all out on the field, which I wonder what they leave out on the field sometimes, but it's, I left it all out there. That's why it's hard sometimes to do an overtime game, because, you've got yourself to exhaustion, you've got nothing else to give. And now it's 20 minutes each way. You've got to find the reserve to keep going. But Paul said, my life has been like that. I've poured it out. I've at least been passionate for something. And sometimes when we do funerals, we look for, what is the person into? What are they passionate about? And for some people, it's really hard. They don't, like Dolores, she doesn't seem to be into anything. At least let's be passionate. We talked about that in the series. Let's be passionate for God. If you are passionate, what are you pouring your life into? What are you pouring your life upon? What would you be prepared to sacrifice for? Because of that reason, Paul left a significant legacy, that great example of someone who was prepared to write this sort of stuff when he was facing a terrible tragedy. Someone wrote in his diary, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep in order to gain what he cannot lose." It was Jim Elliot, one of the him and four other friends, 5 missionaries that gave their life as they tried to contact the Auca Indians. And Roger Youderian, Pete Fleming, Jim Elliot, Nate Saint and Ed McCulley gave their life as missionaries. They left a legacy because they were prepared to give anything and everything to get the gospel out. So I hope our lives reflect that as well. Paul says the time has come for my departure. It's like he's setting sail, like, you've got your tickets already booked, ready to go, and you're going away, at this time. Unfortunately for our life, we don't know when that will be. But he's ready to go at any time. And that's why it's important, I think, to have that proper understanding of what death means for us. It's not universalism where everyone eventually will be saved. It's not annihilationism where everyone just goes into nothing and no one has an afterlife. It's not reincarnation where we get another go and go around again to be spiritually recycled. We know that it's appointed for people to die once and after that to face judgment. And we've got to be ready for our departure. We've got to be ready like Paul was. He says, I've fought the good fight. Sometimes it is a battle, isn't it, life? You've got to fight against yourself. You've got to fight against your enemies. Sometimes it's just really tough. And Paul is not naive to the battles that he faces. But he knows, and he says later, there's a crown of righteousness, not just for me. He said it's not my thing alone because I'm an extra good Christian. It's everyone who looks forward for Jesus coming back again because they've trusted in him. And he had that attitude of knowing that he'd fought the good fight, but that there was something better ahead. Someone's written a book called Your Best Life Now. If Paul had written the book, it would be called Your Best Life in the Future. Earlier on in 2 Corinthians, he says, though we do not lose heart, though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on what is seen, not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. That's amazing for Paul to write that because some of the things that he went through, he says, look, what we're going through is just light and temporary. Well, in real life, it wasn't light. When it was a long time. Some of the things he faced, the times that he spent in jail, the times that he was shipwrecked, the times that he went through. I mean, you and I would just be horrified at some of the things Paul went through. But he said, no, it's just light and temporary compared to what's ahead. There's an eternal glory that outweighs it all. Because he was prepared to fight the fight, to go through the hard stuff, to be beaten up by what life had for him because of what was in the future. He says, I've finished the race. He can see the finish line approaching. Ron shared it a couple of weeks ago, I think, in a communion story about the race. And it's not as if it's a race against everyone else. Because I went to my uncle's funeral a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about my own father's funeral. He died in the early 60s. One of his friends said, because Dad was he liked to drive cars fast, let's just say that. Could never beat him in go-karts when we used to go down the bottom of the range there in Toowoomba. And he made the cars fast and he drove the cars fast. And as his friend said, well, once again, George has beaten us to the finish line. But we're not in a race against other people. As the book of Hebrews says, it's we've got our own lane to run in. We've got our own race. We've got our own way to go. The most important thing, because we're not in a competition against someone else, is that we run our own race and that we do it well. the other verses that I've added to me are interesting, and sometimes the most mundane stuff that is written can have a profound meaning when Paul talks about all these guys, Demas and Crescens and everything like that. I'm interested because of the chronology. It's interesting, more than just interesting, it's informative to find out when things were written about certain people. This is the last mention because scholars believe it's probably one of the last, if not the last, letters written by Paul. Earlier on, Demas is mentioned. He started out strong. In the book of Philemon, he's called a fellow worker with Paul. Good on him. Good old Demas. Then it says in Colossians, Demas sends his greetings to you, saying g'day to the church at Colossae. That's great. But by the end of 2 Timothy, Demas has deserted me. He's run off. He can't stand it. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And that you do finish the race. Then he mentions Mark. Mark's mentioned a few times as well. Early on, not very positively. Mark was a young guy and things got tough, as they often did when you hung around Paul, and he deserted in there. He said, I can't stand it, I've got to go back home. And when it came time for a second journey, Mark said, hey, sorry, I'd like to go again. I've learned, I've grown up. Paul said, no way, not having you. You can go with someone else. And Barnabas ended up taking him, and Paul took Silas, and the missionary journey was split into two. So Paul was quite derogatory of Mark then. But now he's saying, can you send Mark? I'd really like to see him again. He's helpful in my ministry. He's good for me. Maybe Paul was right then, maybe he wasn't. Maybe Mark was in the wrong by doing that, but it's not how you start, it's how you finish. The last mention of Mark is a positive one. It's not how you start the race, it's how you finish it. And to keep the faith, that you remain faithful. I like this quote from Dorothy Patterson. She said, my children will not remember the words of wisdom I passed along over the years, nor will they remember yours and all the good advice you've given, but etched in their minds and planted in their hearts is a permanent picture of who you are and how you've lived before them. I said at my uncle's funeral, it's not everything, we won't remember everything that people said about us, but they will remember how we made them feel. And I hope as you reflect on that time, even if it's like Chrissy Swan, 45 years and you're halfway to dying, that you will reflect on your own life and what sort of legacy that you are leaving behind. And whether we do that individually or corporately, I think one of the things that is difficult, and I preach this to myself as much as anyone, is nostalgia. Some of you may know we moved about 15 months ago from a big house in Ipswich to two-bedroom apartment in West End. And the downsizing has been challenging, not just because of the volume of stuff, but to me it's been the letting go of things. Because I'm the nostalgic one. We went to the Sunflower Festival at Calbar the other day, and I had to swing by the old house just to have a look, just to think of memories. Always used to go by, the houses we used to live. Love that sort of stuff. And so parting with some of those old memories, to me, is really hard. And even the kids don't want the stuff. And I say to the kids, we've got this, we've got a box of stuff. No, don't want it. Take a picture, send it on, move on. Oh, really? And it's fine, nostalgia's good, love it. But we can't live in the past. We can remember it, we can appreciate it for what it is, but we'll have to live in the present and look to the future. Someone said there's nothing wrong with nostalgia in its proper place. There's nothing unhealthy about being nostalgic about the past, as long as you are living in the present and focused on the future. But nostalgia can be a dangerous and seductive temptation. It causes us to trade the potential of the present and the promise of the future for a past that is now only a mirage, because you can't go back there. We can't go back. We can't live there. We've always got to be future thinking, to think whether we're going to be more like Dolores Aguilar and the obituary that was written about her, or about my friend who desperately wanted that other people in her life knew Jesus like she did. That we leave a legacy for the future because of the way that we're living now, appreciating perhaps the foundation that we had of the good things in the past. And I hope whether we've got 30 days or 45 years to leave, that we would genuinely leave a good legacy. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Paul and his commitment to Christ and his example that lives on in us today. And may we learn from him and learn how to live in a way that leaves a legacy for people left behind, whether it's people in the church, people in our family, people in our friendship group. They would desire to see Jesus in them like he is in us. And if we need changing, if we need correcting, if we need repenting, Lord, point that out to us. Thank you for working in our lives, in our world, in our history, right from creation, Lord, to reveal your will and your ways to us. We give you all the praise and thanks for wanting us to know you in a personal way. Thank you for providing for us, and as we go into the Easter season where we see how much it cost Jesus to make provision for us to have a future legacy far beyond the light and the temporary things that we're going through now. We give you thanks for so much for being part of your master plan in this world. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.